Hey everyone, hi, welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to talk with you all about the reasons why I believe I'm having such a great reading year. So if you like chatty videos that talk about our inner lives, or especially our sort of secretive or lonesome, solitary, what is the word? Our solitary reading lives and bringing those out into the light. If you like videos like that, talking about our inner reading life, then I would encourage you to subscribe and stick around. Oh, now let's go ahead and get into the meat of this video. Over the course of the past couple of days, I've recognized that this year has been an excellent reading year for me. And when a thought comes in my brain, like, why am I having such an excellent reading year? How did I get this year to be so great so far? I, of course, begin to mull it over, consider it, and then I came up with a couple of reasons why. So, if you also want to reflect on your reading year so far, I would encourage you to do so in the comments. I'm always so curious about other people and their reading lives and what's going on with you. I'm endlessly curious about how people's reading is going. Like, I find this stuff really fascinating, hence the BookTube channel and the chatty videos about books and all of that. Okay, so first things first. This year in January, actually January 1st, I started a new job. I entered back into the teaching profession. This is a profession for which I had quite a few years of experience. And when I started back, I was quite nervous because I didn't know how much time I would have to read. In previous years as a teacher, the life has been drained out of me. Well, not the life, but my energy to do some of the things that I love has been quite depleted, and I have to wait for either a break, or I would wait until there was a break or a vacation, or when school was out, in order to pick up reading again. And I didn't want that to happen because I really prioritize. I love reading. It's so good for me. It's so good for my spirit, my mental health, and for me as a person. And so I didn't want to give that up. So you can imagine my trepidation when I walked into walked in mid-year to a school, and there was a lot of concern as to whether I would be able to continue reading, And so here's what happened. I was depleted. I was tired. It was quite the transition. However, I did two things that really helped with that transition. The first was I pretty much stopped watching television. I cut my television watching way back. I was in the habit of watching, an hour and a half, 45 minutes at night. Watching television for 45 minutes to an hour and a half at night. And at the beginning of the year, I was like, I think I want that space, that habit to go away. And instead I wanted to replace it with reading. And I wanted to read. I wanted to be able to continue to keep the reading space alive. And the way that I did that, even though I was incredibly tired and it was a huge transition, the way that I did that was that I read graphic novels. And so here I read this whole thing of Bone. I read it on my iPad actually, which I loved. It was a fantastic way to read Bone. But I read Bone. I read the Lightfall series, The Girl in the Galadriel. I'll put a picture up. I read those. I also somehow in January read Middlemarch, which I was so sucked into and couldn't put down. And when it ended, I was very sad that it ended. But I kept that space, that reading space, the hour that I read at night, I kept it alive by filling it with things that I knew I had the capacity to read, like graphic novels. And I didn't feel bad or beat myself up when I didn't read my allotted time, not that I have an allotted time, when I prioritized rest over reading. So I felt like even through the transition, I made it a huge priority to read. Next up, I DNF'd. I started DNFing. Now, if you're new to the BookTube space or you're not sure of all of the acronyms, DNF means do not finish. And what it means is that I started books. I would start a book like The Warden by Anthony Trollope, or A Fine Balance by Rohinton Mistry. Those are two books that I started this year. I would start it, and then something would happen where I would recognize that I wasn't enjoying what I was reading. Sometimes it would be something like I'm reading the same passage over and over again. That is a sign that I'm just not on the same page with the author. Like, I cannot understand what they're doing, what they're saying. And a lot of times it's because I just don't have the mental capacity or the imagination or whatever it is in that moment with that book to conjure what I need to conjure in order to understand the passage. The other thing is when I start to speed read, that's a huge cue that I am not enjoying what I'm reading. I'm starting to just glaze over the details. I'm starting to really pick up, and I'm just trying to get through the book. And so Anthony Trollope was one of those things where I was just like, it is not the right time for me to read you. Now that I look back, I think I was a bit hard on myself. I think I really was understanding what was happening in those passages, but I had this moment where I was like, is this what he's saying? And then when you have that moment over and over and over again in the same evening when you're trying to read something, it makes me feel like my brain is fried. And so I was like, I need to be with a book where my brain doesn't feel fried. And so I had put aside The Warden. I do plan on reading it maybe in Victober, which is in October. In October on BookTube, we read Victorian literature. And so that would be perfect for Victober. But for the moment, when I tried to pick it up in late January, I was like, I don't have the capacity for this for whatever reason. And instead of feeling bad or trying to force it, for which I would just resent the book anyways, I just set it aside. And then A Fine Balance by Rohinton Mistry, I felt like the author was trying to trauma bond with me, like trauma bonding or trying to overshare with me. And I was just like, oh, look, man, I can't do this right now. And so I ended up actually selling that book back to a used bookstore because I couldn't get into it. I didn't like it. And it put a bad taste in my mouth, the whole trauma bonding moment with that book. But anyways, I think that's another reason why my reading year has been so lovely. It's because I have been very keen as to how I'm feeling while I'm reading a book. And if it's not jiving with me, I move on to something that is giving me joy, that I am engaged with. Doesn't mean that all books have been a hit. There have been some misses out there, a huge miss that I will talk about in my wrap-up video or in my tops and flops with Frasier. Huge miss this past month, just terrible book. But for the most part, things have been, my reading life has been really lush and beautiful, full of reads that are giving me quite a bit of joy. The third reason is connected to the second reason. It's part A and B of reason 2, so this is part B of reason 2, is I have been really paying attention to my moods. I've just been what do I want to read? And for the most part, I have been jumping into reads that are just joyful for me. I don't know how to explain it. I am excited. I'm excited about the read. I'm not I don't know. Because that's happened in the past. I sort of approach a book, I'm I guess I'll read it. The attitude of a bit of an indifference to it. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad way to jump into a book, an indifference. However, it is always better when I am enthusiastic about a read and where I want to pick it up, even if there is some trepidation, maybe because of length or language or uncertainty as to whether I'll actually like it or not. But ultimately, the feeling of excitement is the foundation in which I am entering a book, is always a really enjoyable thing. And for the most part, I feel like that's been where I'm at. I'm feeling open about the possibility of where this book will take me. And that's been really great. Connected to mood reading, I guess they're all connected because it has to do with reading. It has to be that I've found a really lovely balance between mood reading on my own and buddy reading. I'm good at deciding how many events to participate in. I think I've just found a really good balance in my reading life. And some of that has been intentional. Intentionally not participating in every single event that I see on BookTube, though every event is very inspiring. And also just knowing how and when to schedule buddy reads, which is an actual thing when you have a limited amount of time, as we all do, to read, and the excitement of BookTube and wanting to buddy read with everyone. I think at first I piled on all the buddy reads, and now since I've been doing this for a little while, I have definitely struck a very beautiful balance in my reading life of reading with others and reading on my own, and all of it is sheer perfection, loveliness. I love it all. Next, I have been the boss of the book prize. I've been bossy. I've been a bit bossy with my book prizes, and here's what I mean about that. Early in the year, I made, or maybe it was at the end of last year, I decided that I didn't want to get caught up in book prizes. And though I've had that mindset in the past, last year I let book prizes really boss me around. They almost bullied me in a sense. I felt so swept up with the enthusiasm of a prize list, and I was just so excited about following the Booker and doing that publicly, and following the Women's Prize and doing that publicly, and reacting to the Pulitzer. This year, I wanted to still have that enthusiasm for book prizes, but without the feeling or the fact of letting these book prizes boss me around. And so I set out a rule of I'm gonna read 1, maybe 2 books from prize lists if they speak to me. And I'm going to choose the books that I think I will enjoy the best. And that is going to be it. And I can still make videos about it, and I can still follow the process with excitement, but I don't have to read all of the books on all of the lists. And that has been incredible. I've gone back to my own collection more. I feel like I was very choosy as to which books I wanted to pick up. And though I absolutely admire those of you who read the entire long list of book prizes, or you dive into book prizes with more gusto than I have this year, I admire you all. I really think what you're doing is awesome. I just also know myself, and I know that reading more from book lists doesn't make me happier. It doesn't make me more joyful. And in fact, it kind of stresses me out like a tiny bit. We're going to be talking about silly stress. Then it kind of just a little bit. And so my choice to be the boss of my own reading and to say, not just because you won this prize or the other doesn't mean I'm going to read you, has felt really good, and it's been in my best interest. So for the Women's Prize, I read The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell, and I read Demon Copperhead. Demon Copperhead happened to be, both books were shortlisted for the Women's Prize, and the winner is to be announced. Demon Copperhead happened to win the Pulitzer, which was just a happy coincidence that I was reading that as the Pulitzer was announced. And I've already decided that I don't want to read Trust by Hernan Diaz. As much as I'm sure it's a fine book, I don't think that book is for me. And then when the Booker, I read one book from the International Booker. I read Boulder by Ava Baltazar, which didn't win, but I thought it was the best book on the list for me, and I really enjoyed my time with that book and the read. And the Booker is coming up, and I feel like because I've kept my head about book prizes thus far this year, I feel really, confident that I'm not going to lose my mind with the Booker long list, short list, and all of that. And that again, I'll choose the books that I feel will suit my reading taste the most, and I will still follow the prize with a ton of interest, but without letting it eat up all of my reading time. I have 2 quick points left. The first as to why my reading life has been so rich and wonderful this year. The first is that I've read a lot of books that I've had on my shelves for a very long time, and taking them off my list and finally reading them has felt really good. Here are a couple of books that have sat on my shelves for years. One of which was The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. Love this book, and it had sat on my shelf. I believe I owned it before BookTube. It had been sitting there for several years. It's a chunky book, but I'm just so glad that I had finally read it. Then I mentioned this already, but Bone has been sitting on my shelves since I've been together with my husband Ted, so for 15 years. I've seen this book on my shelves, and my husband has encouraged me to read it for pretty much that entire time, and finally, I read it, and I really enjoyed it. And then a book that hasn't sat on my shelves that long, but one that I had always wanted to get to, and then finally did, was The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, and I really enjoyed this as well. But it's just nice to read from my own collection. It's really satisfying to take these books off my list and to now see them in a different light because I've read them, you know? That's just been great. My last reason as to why I think my reading life has been so incredible is because I've indulged in a varied reading life. I've been reading my reading life has been very varied. In that I am reading a bunch of different genres, a bunch of different authors. I am just all over the map with my reading, but I love that. I love that. It's been so incredible. And so one of that I read The Theban Plays by Sophocles. This is Greek tragedies, very old. And I was feeling the pull to finally read these, and then I set up a read along essentially on my channel, which forced me to read it, and I'm so glad that I did. And it's this is in stark contrast to Bunny by Mona Awad, which is a totally bananas off the rails book that is about an unhinged woman in graduate school. That it feels very much like The Heathers. The movie The Heathers. Anyways, these two books are so different, and I read them both, and I found joy in both of these books. And part of it is because I believe, when I read the same thing, if I'm constantly reading historical fiction novel with a protagonist that's a female in her late 20s or early 30s, that starts to feel repetitive. And that has similar plot beats. But you get something like this, an ancient Greek tragedy, and then you get something like this that is totally bananas off the rails, strange and odd. And they're, it just is it gives me a lot of joy. It gives me a lot of satisfaction. So it's just been a really lovely thing to have such a variety in my reading. And to just keep my reading on its toes because of the variety that I'm bringing into it, and that's been awesome. I guess in closing, I'll bring it all back to the beginning, to my first reason, and it's that I have continued to prioritize reading in my life. I would have, before BookTube and before I really, I had this space in which I talked to you all and I talked to other readers, I would have times where I would go a period of time. The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. I totally got distracted. I would have periods of time in which I would not read, or I would be reading for other things like work, and that would totally drain me of my reading life, and I would just sort of be well, I read for today. I mean, I know it was all students' papers, but I still read, and thus I'm going to count that for my reading and move on. And now I have really come to the realization, that's probably a better way of saying it, that my reading life is so important to me. It is important for self-care, it's a thing that I do for myself, by myself, that gives me a great amount of joy. I feel very privileged to have the time to read, and I also love the process of reading. It's creative. I feel like I am spending time with art, with the art of words on a page, And I just love it. And so more than ever, I'm so proud of myself, if that's, a way to say it. I'm so proud of myself to have weathered a lot of changes and still been able to keep my reading life as vibrant as it has been. And that's been just incredible. And as you all know, and I'm sure any of you watching, like, one's reading life is such a joy. It's such a joy, at least in my life. And to prioritize the space and keep it alive has been absolutely wonderful. And I didn't know in January. I didn't know entering the workforce and having such a huge change in my life. I didn't know if I would be able to do it. I didn't know if I would just get so stressed out or feel just overwhelmed and let that sort of melt, like creep into my reading life, and then maybe feeling like I needed to let something go and then let that go. But I've realized more than ever that my reading life is something that's worth fighting for, that's worth prioritizing, that's just worth carving out every single day to sit down and read. It's just been incredibly important to me, and I'm just so, so, so glad that I have just made that happen this year. So anyhow, that's it. That got kind of sappy near the end, but you know what? We're just gonna roll with it. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all in my next one. Bye.